The NBA season is over. Congratulations, Toronto Raptors, on your championship. And the new season begins on Thursday with the NBA draft. University of Missouri beat writer Alex Schiffer is there in New York to cover the draft for the Kansas City Star, and he speaks with us on SportsBeat KC, the sports podcast presented by the Kansas City Star. I'm your host, Blair Kerkhoff. Alex Schiffer, our draft man about town, is with us, and by that I mean Alex Schiffer is going to cover his third professional sports draft for the Kansas City Star this week. When he goes to Brooklyn in the Barclays Center to cover the NBA draft, Alex was our man in Nashville at the NFL draft. He covered the WNBA draft largely because of the presence of Sophie Cunningham at Missouri. And now you are in the great Northeast. Alex, how you doing? And set the scene for us. What do you expect to see at the draft on Thursday night?
I'm good, Blair, and a belated Happy Father's Day to you. I meant to text you on Sunday about that.
Thank you very much.
Fun fact, I also kicked the tires on covering the MLB draft with the Royals, obviously, but with Bobby Witt being in Texas, it didn't really make any sense. I think it'll be an interesting group. As this is my third NBA draft I'm covering, the attendance is always kind of varied a little bit. It really hinges on how many local ties there are sometimes. The Knicks are selecting third. They had a good contingent last year with the 9th pick, and they really wanted Michael Porter out of Missouri. Obviously, they wound up with Kevin Knox. The Nets really haven't had a first-round pick since owning the Barclays Center because of that trade with the Celtics involving Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. And, there should be a good Duke contingent there. There's a strong alumni base here with R.J. Barrett and Zion going in the top three. That should help. And there's a couple of guys with some New York ties, Shamari Pond to St. John's, Justin Wright, Foreman, and Hofstra. They're probably second-round picks, but they might show up just because it's close to their home, and maybe, if they think they can go in the second round, they'll go up on stage and shake the deputy commissioner's hand and everything. So it should be pretty well attended, I think.
Yeah, I think in this draft was particularly interesting to me because the lottery was weighted in a different way this year, and you had three teams, the teams with the three worst records, right? The Knicks, the Grizzlies, and the Phoenix Suns. Oh no, it was the Knicks, the Suns, and the Cavaliers with the three worst records. So they had the best chance of landing the overall number one pick, 14% chance. And of course, the overall number one pick went to none of those teams. It went to the New Orleans Pelicans that had the 6% chance of getting the overall number one pick. So Pelicans are up, they're on the clock, and we were pretty certain they're going to take Zion Williamson and John Morant, the Murray State guard. Pretty sure he's going to go to the Grizz, and R.J. Barrett from Duke to the Knicks at number 3. Consensus of opinion seems to be the top three: Zion Williamson, John Morant, and R.J. Barrett. Pelicans, Grizzlies, Knicks. Is that how you see it unfolding?
Yeah, I don't see anybody passing over Zion, and I think John Morant just makes too much sense for the Grizzlies at number 2. I mean, they're rebuilding. They already have Jaren Jackson from Michigan State on the wing. And they could trade Mike Conley, their franchise player, for a ton of assets to a contender and really help their rebuild process along. So I see him going number 2, and then R.J. Barrett, best remaining player. The Knicks need all types of help. So I think it gets interesting just with the Pelicans picking again at 4 because, they've been linked to trading for Bradley Beal, St. Louis native, Washington Wizards star. There's been a lot of talk that the Pelicans aren't done dealing after the Anthony Davis move, and now they have a ton to play with after that trade too. So I think it gets interesting after that third pick, just because you don't know what the Pelicans are going to do. And then there are, the Hawks have the 8 and 10 pick; they could trade that for something. They already tried to get the Knicks to swap picks with them, so I think it gets really interesting after that top 3 for sure.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of different names at that spot for the Pelicans or second pick at number 4. I've seen Darius Garland, who you've mentioned, Jarrett Culver, the Texas Tech guard. I've seen DeAndre Hunter from Virginia, maybe even Kobe White, the North Carolina freshman. I've just seen a lot of names there. Nobody seems to know exactly what might happen, but. What about the draft in general? Is this once we get past Zion Williamson, and let me ask you this: Are you among those who see Zion as a a future NBA, I don't know, All-Star, Hall of Famer? What you saw him play? I didn't get to see him play in person. I don't think you did either this year. But we certainly saw enough of him as a freshman at Duke, and I'm not sure where I'm at with the projections of Zion. I think he's going to have a size issue in the NBA. And what are your thoughts on Zion?
Yeah, to kind of segue into a story I plan to do tomorrow, I talked to the AAU coach that coached Ja Morant and Zion Williamson in the 9th, 10th grade together on the phone for something, and he was saying that, Zion, even then when he was 6'3", 6'4", and still a physical guy, he never really took a lot of threes. He had a really good way to put it, that he just thinks that he was raised to believe that the closer you are to the basket, the higher percentage of the shot goes in. And, people talk about the physique a lot and how that will work in an NBA season. I think it's more just about that he doesn't shoot a lot of threes, and that's really where the game's going. He doesn't really have much of an outside shot. I think he shot around 30%, maybe even a little under that at Duke for his lone season there from three. And I think that's the bigger thing to address than the physique. These NBA people that I've kind of met some at the Combine, when it comes to diet and nutrition and moving weight around and all that, they seem to really have that down pat. And I think they'll figure out what they want to do with him in that department, pretty quickly. And even he goes into summer league, maybe he struggles with that. They start working on that immediately afterward. So I think it's really about, the bigger questions about what he can be are, he's more of a bruiser. There's the Charles Barkley comparison, but, I thought Barkley was a decent three-point shooter too.
Right.
So I think it's more about where his game is at and where the game is going that are really where my issues are.
He could be one of 3 Duke players taken in the top 10, along with R.J. Barrett and Cam Reddish, of course. I'm really interested in Darius Garland, the Vanderbilt. Did he play? I can't remember if he was. He
played 5 games. He was a guy I saw a lot of on AAU because he played with Bradley Beal Elite, even though he was from Nashville. And I thought he was a spectacular player. He was on my preseason All-SEC ballot. I forget where I had him. I might have picked him for Freshman of the Year. But he played 5 games before injuring his meniscus. I think he's got the Michael Porter issue, even though a meniscus and a back are obviously a lot different. But just when he's healthy, he's great. But, what kind of team is drafting him? Do they need immediate help there? Or, do they want to ease him in? Is he their point guard of the future? Do you have someone to kind of learn behind? But I think he's a guy that in a year or two could be a really, really good player just because he can really, when he's healthy, he can really run a team well.
Right. Okay, so there is a little bit of local interest in this draft, and if you're to trust the mocks, it's not going to come until later in the evening in the second round. But Jontay Porter's name is pretty consistent in the second round, and I know he's been living. I don't know how much working out he's been doing, but living with his brother in Denver, and it should be a big night for him. What do you remember about the decision that he made to go into the draft, and why was it a good one? Could he come back and thrived at Missouri this year? Is it the smart move to go into the draft?
I think there was benefit to him coming back for his sake, but I think for Missouri's sake, it was good for him to declare and stay in the draft. He told me that it was never really a significant conversation about him coming back to school. He thinks he should get paid now and sooner you're in the league, sooner you can start working on that second contract where the real money comes in. And, from Missouri's side, it would have been the past 2 seasons, Cuonzo Martin and his team have had to deal with losing their best player, a Porter brother, to injury. And, at least there was with Jontay, no questions as to whether or not he'd come back and whatnot. But I think that for Cuonzo and the program's sake, it was better to move on. And, they go into next season not having to worry about that, having that kind of, they had the whole thing with Mike and whether or not he was going to play towards the end of last season. I think Jontay and Mike are very different players, obviously, but, for the people that say, well, Jontay's not the kind of player that will throw the offense out of whack like Mike would, you don't know that. And, it's a Missouri team next year that's going to have a lot of different guys to lean on rather than just one like it would have been had Jontay never gotten hurt. So I think it would, for the program's sake, it's better for Jontay to just go into the NBA and see what he can do there rather than it being another year where there's a lingering question of when he's coming back and how we can help and how they're going to implement him. I think think Cuonzo Martin needs to move on from that, from to establish his program.
Okay, and Jonte would be he's not playing this season, right? I mean, the second ACL is going to keep him out for if he gets drafted or whatever team he lands. He's not going to be playing in 1920. Is that correct?
I think so. I talked to him about it at the Combine, and he was I thought his answer made a lot of sense of just who knows. The team that could draft me, it's going to be their call ultimately. And, he'll get cleared probably with the ACL around next January or so. I think we have to wait and see who he ends up with. If he's on a team that has some depth there and doesn't have to worry about him, maybe they throw him in the G League a little bit just to see what he can do and kick some rust off. Maybe they redshirt him the whole year. I think that I wouldn't expect to see him play, but it's ultimately going to be the team's call.
Okay. And a couple other local names that, at least according to what I'm seeing, probably not going to names won't be called on Thursday night. One is Dedrick Lawson of Kansas, and I don't see any of the Kansas State players, Dean Wade or Barry Brown Jr., showing up in the mocks. Maybe they're top 100 guys, but in the NBA draft, it's 60. There are 60 slots, and I just don't see them drafted. I do believe that Dean Wade has a chance to make an NBA team, but I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see his name called on Thursday night.
Yeah, so I just got done checking a mock draft from Sam Viceni, who's one of the main authorities on that. He has Dean Wade as Mr. Irrelevant at number 60. And he has Dedrick Lawson going undrafted, and then Jonte Porter going 49th to the Spurs in the second round, which I think would be a great fit. And I agree. I think the first round of the NBA draft is very easy to project most of the time. So you rarely see people get, even if the teams are wrong, it's the main 30 guys. I think the second round, it gets a little interesting. I remember when Phil Pressey went for Missouri, he could have gone in late second round. His agent said, don't bother. We want you to pick your own destination, go undrafted, and that's how we wound up making the Celtics. I think a lot of that comes down to, what the agent's call is and who they're with and how many options they could potentially have. I think Jonte Porter would have a ton of options if he went undrafted, while, maybe Dean Wade would have a little less, given some of the questions around him. So I think it's really a crapshoot in the second round, especially, from the last 20 picks when the guaranteed contracts are no longer a thing. So I've seen Wade on some. I've seen Dedrick Lawson on some. I don't think we'll know until Thursday, really, whether or not they're going to go in terms of what their camp's decision is. But, it takes a certain pick. I think, all right, if we don't go by this pick, you're going undrafted. You know what I mean?
Yep. Total crapshoot in the second round. And I think we'll see two Big 12 players go probably in the lottery, and Jarrett Culver from Texas Tech, and Jackson Hayes, the Texas freshman, big guy, son of former Chiefs tight end Jonathan Hayes. But I think that's it for Big 12. And if Dedrick Lawson doesn't get drafted, that'll be the first time since 2009, I believe, that no Kansas player was selected in the NBA draft. So I tell you what, Alex, we're going to take a little break here. We're going to come back and talk some Missouri basketball. You had interesting conversation with Cuonzo Martin and projected some playing time, rotation, starters, and we'll be back in a minute and talk about that. Hey, it's Blair Kerkhoff, and if you're listening to this, you love Kansas City sports, whether it's the Chiefs, Royals, Sporting, Mizzou, KU, or K-State. And no one covers these teams like the Kansas City Star. If you currently subscribe to the paper or have a digital subscription, thank you for your support. And if you don't, here's a great offer. It's called Sports Pass, unlimited digital access to every sports story and video on kansascity.com. And it's just $30 for the first year. It's the best sports value in town, just 8 cents a day or $2.50 a month. You can't beat that. Subscribe now at kansascity.com/sportspass. Okay, I'm back with Alex Schiffer, the Missouri beat writer for the Kansas City Star. Alex is in Brooklyn to cover the NBA draft. Before he left, he took a stab at Missouri basketball prospects for next season, maybe used the latest signee as a jumping off point for this, the 7-footer Axel Okongo. Did I pronounce that right, Alex?
Yes.
Okay, and so what you did was you projected rotation, starters, depth. I thought that was really interesting. What were the biggest challenges in breaking this down? Before you answer that, let's just say your projected starting lineup has Mark Smith at the shooting guard, Drew Smith at the point, Torrance Watson at the wing, Trey Jackson, the freshman, at power forward, and Jeremiah Tillman at center. And then I look at who you've got in the mix in some of these. You guys have got some good minutes this past season coming off the bench. It certainly seems like it's one of the probably the deepest team that Cuonzo Martin would have had in his 3 years at Missouri.
Yeah, it was a really hard thing to pick just because I just think there's so many different ways that they could go with it. And they're good problems to have, obviously. You're talking about a team that in Cuonzo's first year, by the time they got to the NCAA tournament, they had like 8 available guys because of injuries and everything. But I struggled so much with it because I think they can get so creative in so many different ways. I saw Trey Jackson extensively play AAU, and they used him as a ball handler at times. They used him as a 2 and a 3. I think that he could do a lot of different things for them. Kobe Brown is another guy like that. And do they have these crazy lineups where we see them just go gigantic with these 6'7", 6'8" ball handlers? So the Okongo commitment really threw me for a loop because I don't think anyone saw that coming. He didn't really play a lot in junior college. I was looking up some history. Mizzou's got a really mixed history with junior college guys. Kansas rarely takes a junior college guy. I struggled to see some of their history. It's Keanu Post was a JUCO All-American that didn't really do much for Mizzou. Ricardo Ratliff was one of the best bigs in the country at Mizzou. So I think that you can make a lot of cases for the guys I picked for why they should start and why they might come off the bench. And others, like Jeremiah Tillman was a given. I think Drew Smith has to start based on everything we've heard about him. But after that, it really gets interesting. And that's why I think it's, Cuonzo has a lot of options. It's not a bad thing, but it raises a lot of questions as to where he wants to go with this team.
Yeah, I think when you projected a starting lineup, it was pretty much basically every player with it's Missouri playing to its strengths at each position. You kind of took the guy who seems to fit physically at that position and made him a starter, and nothing wrong with that. I think that's you could be absolutely right about this, but I do like the idea of being able to go small or go big. These are options that Cuonzo Martin really hasn't had in his first 2 years to the extent he may have it this year.
I agree, and even just with some of that stuff. I mean, do you go with a 4-guard style? We've heard some rumors that Xavier Pinson starts alongside Drew Smith. I don't see you substituting Mark Smith out of that lineup, given he nearly shot 50% from 3. So what I think it comes down to for Cuonzo, what matters more, is it length or experience? Because that's a starting lineup of Pinson, Drew Smith, Mark Smith, maybe Torrance Watson, and Tillman. That's a 4-guard lineup. That's a small lineup. You're sacrificing Jackson's length for Watson's experience, but that's not, that's 2 primary ball handlers in Pinson and Drew Smith. I think that's a very dangerous lineup if they go that way. And then even the original one I had that I think makes a lot of sense of bringing Pinson off the bench for another year and having Trey Jackson, who they're very high on. He was a top 60 recruit. They think he has pro potential. They got nothing out of that power forward spot ever since Jonte Porter went down. So I think that, again, as you said, these are all good problems, but there's so many different arguments for all these guys and why you put one here over there and start him, bench him, the argument there. So it's there's experience that Cuonzo Martin hasn't had a ton of in his first 2 years, and then there's length, which he also hasn't had a ton of, and both are good problems, and both are things he can desperately use.
Absolutely. Now, every Power 5 program is going to think it's an NCAA tournament team in June, and I'm sure Missouri feels the same way. So let's look at this a little differently. SEC teams play 18 conference basketball games. So I always kind of judge it by that. If you're a 500 team in the SEC or a game over 500, you're probably you're a postseason team, probably an NCAA tournament team these days, as good as the SEC has been. So let's just at what you know about the roster, what you know about the returning players. What is this? Is this a 9-9 team? Is this a 10-8, 11-7? 11-7? What are we looking at here with this team?
I think the expectation should definitely be an NCAA tournament bid. When Cuonzo took the job and landed the Porters and everything, I think the rebuild kind of got ahead of schedule in a sense of what to expect and, when Missouri should be competing for a postseason bid. And obviously, given everything that's happened, his first year was very impressive given all that. I just think that, this is essentially his team now. The only remaining Kim Anderson guys, I think, are Reed Nico and Mitchell Smith. And he's completely remade Mitchell Smith from a traditional 5 into more of a stretch 4. So, that one even kind of varies by argument. And I just think this is completely his team. I think that the non-conference schedule is going to be there for them to maybe even get a little bit away with maybe a 500 record or, 10-8. In the SEC, just because, they have Utah, which should be a decent team. Illinois looks to be a pretty good team. The bragging rights game is always a given. It just comes down to how good is Illinois. And, in the past few years, it hasn't really been a resume win. This year it should be, given everything Illinois brings back. And, of course, they're in the Kansas City tournament over the Sprint Center, which has some Power 5 teams, Stanford. Trying to remember who else is in there off the top of my head.
Butler and Oklahoma.
Yeah, so those wouldn't be bad resume wins either for them. So I just think that the path is there for them to make the NCAA tournament, and they, I don't know what the excuse is this year if they don't, just because, the past few years they've been without their best player. This is a much deeper team. They have some experience in guys like Drew Smith and Mark Smith now that they're upperclassmen essentially. And, I think the biggest determining factor this season is going to be what do we get with Jeremiah Tillman. Do we see a Jeremiah Tillman? He's halfway through his college career. Do we see him finally fix the foul troubles? I mean, it's I remember at the Advocare Invitational, Cuonzo's first season at Disney World, an assistant coach from a Big 12 team came up to me and said, Jeremiah Tillman is an NBA prospect whenever he figures out the foul troubles. He only cut down by 10 from his freshman to sophomore. I don't know about you, Blair. I lean to you on this. I don't think that's that much of an improvement. And I think the eye test is a big thing too, obviously. But if the whistle blows, the whistle blows. You know what I mean? And if he figures it out and can stay in the game a long time, I think that this is a team that could make its way into the second weekend. But if it's not, that I think he's the biggest X factor for this team, and he hasn't given a lot of reason to think that he's going to figure it out.
No, I'm going to tell you, reach fouls 25 feet from the basket when you have 2 and it's early in the second half. Those are the types of fouls that just kill Tillman. Not the bang bang plays. It was the dumb plays that he had to learn from. And I just think being on a better team is going to help him this season. And he's a year older, just a year smarter. I agree with you. I think this is a Missouri team when we see the projections come out. I don't know if it's not a preseason top 25 team, but I think you'll see them in some NCAA tournament projections, and it'll be, it'll be good to see because it's. I think we agree that Cuonzo Martin did a terrific job his first year with the Porter injury, and then it was things caught up with the program last year and was not able to overcome the second Porter injury. Hopefully that won't be as much a factor this year, and we'll have a team healthy most of the season, ready to go, and I do think that this has a chance to be an NCAA tournament team. Okay, Alex. With that, we will get out of here and let you get back to your prep for the NBA draft on Thursday in Brooklyn, and then from there off to Wilmington, Delaware, to check out the Royals' high Class A affiliate in the Carolina League, the Blue Rocks of Wilmington. So, Alex, safe travels, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you for having me, Blair. Always a pleasure.
Links to the stories we discussed can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com, and read all of Alex Schiffer's Missouri coverage in the print editions of the Kansas City Star. Thanks to producers Kathy Liu and Leah Becerra. You've been listening to SportsBeat KC, sports podcast presented by the Kansas City Star, and we'll be back soon to talk Kansas City sports.